Everybody remembers their firsts, our first favorite bands, albums, and songs, the music that became the foundation of our lives and our memories. We're taking a stroll down memory lane today on Top 5. Hello again, Top Fivers. As always, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons and the little notification bell. It really helps out the channel. As I've always joined by my wonderful co-host Shauna. Hello, beautiful. Did I find you? There you are. Hey, good
Hello, everybody.
morning. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm not sunburned like somebody I heard was, so that's a good
Yes.
thing.
Ouchie, ouchie, ouchie. Can you see
All
my?
right. Oh, that does not look fun.
It is not fun.
So today we're talking about musical influences, our first favorite albums and bands, and the artists that created them. So why don't I sure where to get started on this one? What really got you rolling and came to music?
I would say a combination of two people. My uncle Bruce, who listened to classic rock and a little bit of what we would call yacht rock right now, like Pablo Cruz and Christopher Cross and stuff. And then what really kind of hit that home for me was my sixth grade teacher, Mark Marriott. He did this fun game that we used to do. He would have the class kind of turn our backs away from the turntable, and then he would drop the needle on a song or an album, and
Sure.
he would have us guess like either the band, the song, or the album, and whoever was first, won a prize or whatever. But yeah, he introduced our class to rock music that I absolutely love even until this day.
Sure, absolutely. So, you and I are about the same age, so we're coming up into the mid to late 70s. That was really for me, that's when I started becoming aware of music. Everything else was
Yeah,
what my parents liked. So
yeah.
for me, it was my brother Randy. He was 8 years older than I was, and 8 years, 9 years older than I was. So his influences were completely different from what I mean, I didn't have anything that I really listened to. So my parents' car stereo, and it was never on anything that was interesting. It was always on some country station or whatever like that.
I know the feeling.
Randy, Randy brought home, the first Van Halen album and the first Foreigner album, and he was into Heart and Steve Miller and Led Zeppelin and all these fantastic ELO, Boston. He had all these fantastic albums that nowadays we'd pay a fortune to have. These first pressings of and such like that. But that's really what got me started. With him was him and his influence there. What was the first band that you just kicked in with? That was just you.
Um, I want to say the one that just really kind of grabbed me um, is kind of between two bands. When Mr. Marriott dropped the needle on "Can't You Hear Me Knocking" by the Stones, and
Mm.
then there was another one, "Black Water" by the Doobie
Oh,
Brothers,
sure, sure,
and
sure.
I was like, I need to have more of this. I need to listen to more of this. And so, yeah, that's where it all started.
The harmonies from the Doobie Brothers were just, especially on Blackwater, that's such a prime example of that. But it's just wonderful, wonderful melody lines, and the people, true artists who could write fantastic material, you
Hmm.
know. But bringing it across, I guess that's why we always remember the great bands, for what they bring to us. My first true love was probably Foreigner, their self-titled first album. That there's something about that blues based guitar centered rock and roll, that for them they had a lot of power, and even on that very first album a lot of production, a lot of polish, from obviously a band that had done the bands and the bars and the local gigs and all this stuff as they were coming up and into this. And it was just their song on that first album, it's called Head Knocker. Most
Yeah,
people don't know that song, but I love that song.
I love that song. That's a great song. Great out. That's a great opening track to that album. It's fantastic.
It is a fantastic song. And when you listen to that, and then you have "Long Way from Home," "Cold as Ice," "Feels Like the First Time," it is just
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, are you kidding? How can you not love this band?
Exactly. And it's like track after track after track, just really is, it kind of builds on itself, and it's amazing. And it's
Yeah.
one of those albums that you don't mind having that vinyl and flipping it over, flipping it over. And one of the bands that I loved, that I, do that same thing, that I can't get enough of listening to it, especially if I've gone like on a dry spell from them for a little bit. And then in fact, this happened to me yesterday when I was out gardening. I set uh, my AI service to like a classic rock um, stream, like a
Sure,
classic rock
sure.
channel, whatever. And they played a track by Boston. And their first album for me is one of those. I mean, every single one eventually was released as a single. And like flipping, because it's every single track is amazing. And the harmony's there. And you cannot deny Brad Delp's amazing voice. It's just something strikes a chord in my soul.
The sad thing about Boston was, now we have, with the internet, we have our hands on so much information. We know so much about everything. There's, somebody comes on the scene and you instantly know everything about them.
Yeah.
And and I can never remember the poor guy's name, the guitarist, the MIT engineer.
Tom Schultz.
Yes, Tom Schultz. I knew it was close to that. Anyways, um, the amazing thing about him is the story. Here, this guy is sitting in his dorm room, going to school, doing his thing, and he creates these his distortion pedals for the guitar. He plays the all the instruments for the first album. He has it all down himself, and the music industry recognizes the genius that it is, puts a band around him of studio musicians, and then a mainstream America calls him corporate rock, and they have a hard time getting traction from the real fans because they think they're not this band that's been paying their dues, that they were just put together. And it
Right.
really did them a disservice, because Tom Schultz was freaking amazing. That should be taught as musical part of musical theory or musical education. It's just a story of Boston, how that came together.
Yeah. Yeah. An amazing story. And I love them, and I have to say all the way up until and including Third Stage. And then after, I mean, I don't even know what happened. Everything kind of fizzled out. We lost Brad Delp. But those first three albums for me are quintessential rock. I love all of them. And from there, let's see, there, Rolling Stones, Boston, Journey. And that's for me, when in my I would say the prime of my youth, I lived, breathed, ate, drank, slept Journey. And you know this about me, and anyone who
Sure.
knows that Journey was, practically my religion. So
Right.
that's and I have a whole diatribe about Journey. So we'll just like touch on the Journey
We're gonna
subject.
have to just do a Journey episode someday.
We probably
I'll let you take over.
have a lot to say about Journey.
Well, the amazing thing, I mean, so for me, Foreigner really kicks. That was my favorite band back then. But you know, Van Halen, the first Van Halen album, one of those we flip it over albums because you can just keep
Yeah.
listening to it. And as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid, I knew I liked it. I just didn't know what it was all about. You don't, yes, they're playing the guitars, they're playing the drums, but you don't, I don't know how you could put that together. You just knew you liked it. Didn't understand it. You
Right.
just liked it. Didn't understand a word about their singing about it. I had no idea what atomic punk was, or why Jamie's crying or anything. It's just it just was an amazing album. And you
Yeah.
take that and you throw in a Led Zeppelin 4 and
Oh,
the first Hard album
yeah.
and Pieces of Eight by Styx, and
Yeah.
now I have a really solid you know basis for what I do listen to, and how and and then on the back side of that, put on a Dark Side of the Moon, and now you have this whole range, songs to get you pumped up and moving, songs to kind of keep you grooving, or songs that you can just close your eyes and just listen to, and
Yeah.
absorb the depth behind it. And at 8 years old, 9 years old, I didn't even know what depth was, but you can appreciate, you recognize greatness for what it is,
Right.
So
Absolutely. And one of the influences that my Uncle Bruce had on me, like I said, was with the Eagles.
sure.
And I fell in love with that sound. I still love that sound. I think they're an amazing band. Was fortunate enough to see them on their Hell Freezes Over tour in
Mm.
1995. And ooh, that's a life changer.
Well,
Yeah.
it's one of the bands, and you've seen it through history. There's certain bands that are too talented to stay together forever. There's just too much. I don't want to even say ego. There's just too many personal directions they want to go to have they stay cohesive. At least in my opinion. Um, Yes is a great example of that.
Fantastic. Yes.
They create an amazing sound. They are amazing people. Individually, they are amazing artists.
Yeah.
And Tensions just kept that band from ever just keep realizing what they were doing, I think, I mean, where would we be without Glenn Fry's solo career or Don Henley's solo career?
True.
They had to venture out there, so Joe Walsh is another story. But
Hey,
you know,
we love some Joe.
Oh, you know what? I'm over the top with Joe Walsh. I've been on a binge for him here lately. I
Yeah.
truly appreciate him, but
He
obviously with
got
the
some
James gang,
gang. Yeah.
yeah,
And then
beforehand,
got some James gang going on in there too.
and it's funny that Don Henley had his trepidations about bringing Joe in because Joe was considered a little too wild for the Eagles, image and whatever like that, And yeah, what a great addition to the band. But some of
Yeah.
his stuff he did in the '80s, or early '80s particularly, was fantastic.
Mhm.
Just Joe Walsh by himself. And I don't know. I think the Eagles would have swallowed some of that up, in just being the band. So it was what an amazing time. I mean, so we started talking about what our inspirations were. Um, what directed you to, because I know you love some hard rock stuff. I know you love some what I would call easy listening stuff, and you like a lot of stuff in between. What really kind of filtered you one way or the other?
Um, I wouldn't say it was any particular thing. It was if um I felt something move my soul
Hmm.
in a positive way. I mean, because I'll hear a certain song by a certain band on the radio, and I won't mention any names, but every single time I hear it, it makes my skin crawl, and I have to turn it off, and
Right.
or it changes the radio station or something. And I gotta say, there's only out of all the music that I like, there's only about 5 people that I can say that about whether they're you know individuals or they're a band. But I do like a whole lot of stuff, like from, like you said, yacht rock, soft rock, all the way up into the hard rock region. Um, but it's something about the bands, the harmonies, and a lot of like the imagery that
Sure.
it in my head that kind of stirs me. Um, the Beatles is one of those bands,
Sure.
and Led Zeppelin, and Tom Petty.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Petty and the Heartbreakers. I mean, I think I own every single vinyl that they ever put out, with the exception of maybe one. Um,
Really.
yeah, and then the rest of them I do own on like CD and stuff. But um, yeah, just in another amazing band.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because my mom obviously had an influence. My parents did have an influence. My dad not so much because my dad could take or leave music. He's one of those guys. It didn't matter.
Yeah.
But my mom loved music. My mom had played she was the drummer of her own band in the late 50s, early 60s. I have a picture
Got
of
it.
her at the drum kit, which is kind of funny.
Oh my God,
But
that's
she played,
badass.
she played both types of music, country and western. So, anyways, there's her and her band, the Buckaroos. But
Oh,
my mom loved music, and so I developed a serious um, I can't appreciation for. And I tell my family and my particularly my son Hunter, he grew up with the idea that I stressed to him: there's no denying a good melody. It doesn't matter what genre of music it is. If it's
right.
a well written song, you can appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah.
And so, as I mentioned to you before, and I grew up with all this old classical country stuff. Tennessee Ernie Ford and Buck Owens and Roy Clark and Charlie Rich and Charlie Pride and Tom T. Hall, and it was later on came those new guys, Chris Christopherson or whatever.
Eddie Arnold, let's
Oh,
slip him old country.
so yeah, so I mean, all of that. So that was my mom's wheelhouse, and
Yeah.
Patsy Cline and Loretta Lynn and such. So even though I don't listen to the old school country nowadays, it
Right.
really helped me transition into some of the stuff that I learned later in life with country music. Even I mean, we lived in Oklahoma. You and I you still live there, but we lived there so long. It's hard not to appreciate some form of country. Now you have Garth Brooks and Blake Shelton and Toby Keith, and Oklahoma is a hotbed for that. But I still don't necessarily gravitate toward that. But I'm married to a woman who that is her world. She loves country music. She also tremendously loves AC/DC and Ted Nugent and those other great bands too. But she is a country girl for all through and through as far as that goes. So it's because I had an appreciation for that helped our relationship also. That I could reach in and listen to some of this music and say, hey, that's really a good song.
Yeah.
And like most people, if you've ever seen Garth Brooks live in concert, it's a great time. So
I saw Blake Shelton recently and was
did
blown
you?
Well, and I'm not, by and large, I'm not a big, huge country fan. I mean, I
Right.
grew up. My father was the country guy. My mom was more into Johnny Mathis, Barbara Streisand, and musicals like Paint the
Mm.
Wagon and Sound of Music and stuff like that. But um, when we were in my father's vehicle, it was always country, and Conway,
Mm.
George Jones, and stuff like that. And because of that, I don't know, I could there's some songs that I can connect with, and that I do appreciate, but by and large, it's just, it doesn't move me. It doesn't move my soul. But I do have to say that I did go to Blake Shelton a couple of weeks ago, and I was blown away. Dude is a performer. And
Yeah,
and honestly, I would kind of say that like today's country is more Southern rock.
it
Wouldn't you?
really is. Oh,
Because
absolutely.
that there's still, the twang, but let's be honest. I mean, the Eagles have a country sound.
Oh, very much so. That's
And
why Bill's in the
Tom
band,
Petty, the Heartbreakers have a country sound.
right?
Now, and Tom's band that preceded Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers was called Mudcrutch, and they were very Southern rock. And they actually just released like a couple of albums a few years ago, and I can't recall off the top of my head what Mudcrutch put out and when it was. I believe it was 2008.
Right.
But
That sounds right.
there's a song on there called "I Don't Scare Easy." That's my jam. And it's got these country influence, but I would say it's by and large more Southern rock.
Gotcha. That's
Anything wrong?
awesome.
Anything
Well,
wrong?
to build upon that point, it was about country music and Southern rock. What you really saw from that was the early '90s. When the early '90s was coming around, that kind of was like another renaissance of country music. You had the '80s with Alabama and a very southern, but not a southern rock sound, a very southern country sound. They played that
Yeah.
region area, and they had a very distinct image and sound to them. And then you had quite a few other little, you went from Ronnie Millsap and Eddie Rabbitt in the early 80s, which were
Yeah.
not what I would consider even country. They were more contemporary country, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Ronnie with his piano and his beautiful voice, and then Eddie Rabbitt with his whole, snappy, you
Love
know,
night. I love
yeah, exactly. So you had this transition into, I
kind
think
of
what Alabama hit it so big is Alabama was really back to the roots of country, and they just exploded in that arena. And then you had around the time when the early '90s started rolling around, you had Garth roll out with his sound, which was Bob Seger and the Detroit that whole era that he grew up in with the
mm,
Beatles and Billy Joel's influence. And that really shaped Garth, and you hear that direction going forward. It was amazing. But then you had like Sawyer Brown, who was a late '70s, early '80s rock band that transitioned into country, but they still had
yeah.
that rock sound. Or Toby Keith. You can't deny Toby Keith
Right.
or Blake, or they have a rock background, and it comes out in
Yeah.
their music. But that brought that transition.
Something that I heard about with Garth Brooks, I actually saw an interview that he did that really kind of surprised me, and it made me grow like an appreciation for like his musical background and his influences. And two of his musical influences that you would never even thought of that kind of stirred those you know feelings for him and that drive and that talent. One was James Taylor.
Oh, sure. He
And
loves James Taylor.
me too. And I'm a huge JT fan. I've seen him 8 times. Um, but the other one that really surprised me that Garth absolutely loved growing up was Kiss.
Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly.
All bands, really?
That's funny because we talked about this before too. Kiss was at their height when I was starting to listen to music, but my brother Randy wasn't into them, and so I never listened to their songs. My first Kiss album was 1982, or 83, excuse me, Lick It Up. When they took their makeup off, that was my first exposure to Kiss. Because by that time, at this time, I'm listening to my own radio stations, and their old
Yeah,
stuff was kind of not cool at the time. People kind of
right.
forgetting old Kiss, and they wisely, and being the businessman they are, they reinvented themselves, and
Yeah.
here we have this new Kiss. So that new sound for them, that's what I was used to. So my idea of Kiss when I'm talking about Kiss is from '83 on, not anything necessarily prior to. But so you have this foundation. So if I was to name my top 5 bands from that foundational period, if I was to put them in order, that might be a little trickier, but I'll try.
Yeah.
I would say number 5 would be Pink Floyd.
Okay.
With a special shout out to Boston because Pink Floyd would bump them out of the list. Top four would be Styx. So much, and it's funny as foundational as they are now. I don't even really listen to them today. I've kind of moved past that because they have a very '70s sound.
Yeah.
And I've kind of moved slightly beyond that. But they were huge back in the day, and I still can't listen to Pieces of Eight or hear Renegade come on the radio without just screaming along with it.
Yeah.
I would move into Heart. Loved early Heart albums. They
Yeah.
just have that raw guitar, chugga 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 chugga. Well, Barracuda, is
Yeah.
exactly what that song's about. But from Crazy on You and all that, I mean, there's just some amazing stuff in there, and you can't hear the Wilson sister, especially Anne. Her voice is just amazing.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah.
number 2 for me would have to be Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin 4, it was obviously the landmark that it was, but Led Zeppelin 1 through 3 was just as equally landmark. I mean, they're what an amazing collection of 4 albums, and we could talk for hours just on Led Zeppelin if we wanted
Yeah.
to.
Sure.
And number 1, only because it was my first love musically, would be Foreigner, because Foreigner really set a bar. And the nice thing about Foreigner is that was their first album that I fell in love with, and they kept coming out with Double Vision everything else that rolled out through Foreigner 4, into then straight into the heart of the 80s with some of their biggest hits. So they were with me as I was continuing to develop my own personal music style and flavor and tastes.
Yeah. Well, I want to say, like, for me, from age of maybe 10 to 18,
Right.
my top 5 is different than what my top 5 are now as an adult.
Oh, absolutely.
So back then, I want to say my top 5, and I can't really like number them, but I would say in my top 5, well, except for the number 1 spot for me of all time, Journey. Okay.
Oh,
but let's go with the Eagles, Foreigner, Boston, the Stones, and then we're going to round out the top of the echelon with Journey.
Nice. See, the Stones are interesting for me because I never had an album that I could identify that's a Rolling Stones album. I only heard the singles because you hear them on the radio, whatever like that. That's how I always identified the Stones, and so there are certain songs from them that I absolutely love. One of my favorite songs of all time, easily top 25, is "Honky Tonk Woman." The combination of that funky cowbell drums they have going with Keith Richards on his little tuned down to G for whatever reason on his guitar, and he's like, "I'm going to G for this one." Whatever, it's just amazing. So I love that. So they are a nice influence for me, but I don't have an album that's boy, I just have to have that album because that's the album, So
yeah. For me, I mean, one of my favorite Stone songs I think of all time is "She's a Rainbow," and by and large, that was because of my daughter. When I had her, she was about 2 years old. It was playing on the classic rock station here in Oklahoma City, and she was just spinning and spinning and spinning, and it reminded me of when I first heard that song, of how beautiful that piano part on it.
Sure.
And it was just one of those fun songs that brought me back to happy times in my childhood. But now as an adult, I would say my top 5, of course, Journey is still there. They're in the top 5. Tom Petty, the Stones, Led Zeppelin, and U2.
Oh, nice. Yes. So and we're going to talk about this in other episodes, but there was a transition, and there always is for everybody when you're talking about the songs you're first to get exposed to, particularly for our people our age, because we had to go through disco, and which thank goodness we did, because there's some amazing music in there, but at the time it became very uncool. For rock fans, you just didn't embrace disco, but there's some artists that we should talk about down the road that were transitional. Tom Petty's a great example of it. That helped bridge the gap from late 70s rock into early 80s rock. And nowadays my top 5 list would not resemble what my earliest influences were. My top 5, actually they would almost all be different. But it's because of growing and changing and learning and expanding, that what we do, because you can only live off your brother's record collection for so long, So
sure.
and thank goodness for K-Tel or whoever, RCA, who used to do that, 16 albums for a penny, because I owe them quite a bit of money still.
Hilarious.
Yes, but I got a good tape, cassette there to work with a whole studio full of music for them for a penny.
That's funny.
So, anyways, well, that probably wraps up today's show. I appreciate it. And if you guys have any ideas, please leave in the comment section. Talk about what you're thinking about, maybe what your influences were, things you'd like to see us talk about. We'll take it from there. But until next time, from us, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Keep rocking.
Keep rocking. Absolutely. All right. Good.